March 6, 1914, George Vanderbilt awoke in a Washington, D.C. hospital room feeling worse than the day before. He was 51, recovering from what should have been a simple appendectomy. Doctors had insisted the operation was safe, the recovery uncomplicated. But something had gone wrong. His fever climbed, the pain spread. By nightfall, he would be gone. 300 miles south, in Asheville, North Carolina, stood Biltmore Estate, 250 rooms, 178,000 square feet, the largest private home ever built in America. George had spent 6 years constructing it, pouring millions into creating a French-style chateau in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside were priceless artworks, rare books, and European furnishings. He had assembled 125,000 acres of forest and farmland. He had built an American palace to rival anything in Europe. And within hours, all of it would belong to his widow. Edith Vanderbilt was 42, with a 14-year-old daughter. She had no business experience, no legal background, and no real grasp of what was coming. George's sudden death would trigger a financial disaster that nearly wiped out everything he had created. Because in October 1913, only months before he died, the U.S. government enacted a completely new law, the federal estate tax. And the Vanderbilts were about to become its earliest and most visible casualties. Over the next 15 years, Edith would fight the government just to keep her home. She would lose 90% of the estate George had assembled. 87,000 acres sold off, art auctioned, furniture dispersed. The lawyers' fees would drag on for years. The financial pressure would be overwhelming. And even after she won, she would discover that victory wasn't enough. The Great Depression would force one final concession, one George would never have accepted. She opened the doors to strangers. This is the story of how the IRS nearly took Biltmore, how one widow battled the federal government and sacrificed almost everything to save her home, yet ultimately preserved it by breaking the rule her husband held most dear. If you enjoy stories about the price of preserving history, hit like and subscribe. Let's begin with the telegram that changed everything. Chapter 1, March 6, 1914, the day everything collapsed. George Washington Vanderbilt IV was born into American aristocracy on November 14, 1862. The youngest grandson of Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, the railroad titan who amassed one of the greatest fortunes in U.S. history. While his older brothers battled over the family businesses, the youngest preferred books. He collected rare volumes, studied architecture, traveled Europe in search of culture and sophistication. He was shy, scholarly, far more comfortable in a library than in a boardroom. When his father, William Henry Vanderbilt, died in 1885, the intellectual son inherited about $10 million. It was far less than his brothers received, but still enough. He didn't want to run railroads or expand empires. He wanted to build something beautiful, something permanent, something proving American wealth could create art equal to Europe's. He chose Asheville, North Carolina, a cool mountain town with breathtaking views, and began buying land. By 1889, he owned 125,000 acres of Blue Ridge forest and farmland. He hired Richard Morris Hunt, America's greatest architect, to design a chateau modeled on the French Renaissance palaces of the Loire Valley. Construction began the same year and continued for 6 years. More than 1,000 workers created 250 rooms filled with every imaginable luxury: a 70-foot banquet hall, a library of 10,000 rare books, an indoor pool, a bowling alley, central heating, electric lights, refrigeration. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. On Christmas Eve 1895, the owner moved into Biltmore. He was 33, unmarried, master of a mansion that cost more than $6 million to build. For 3 years he lived there alone, occasionally hosting guests, managing his forests, embracing the life of a country gentleman. Then in 1898 he married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser in Paris. She was 25, from a distinguished Rhode Island family. Educated, refined, the quiet collector had finally found someone who understood his vision. Their daughter Cornelia was born at Biltmore in August 1900. He was 37, she was 27. They had wealth, a magnificent home, and a growing family. Days were spent managing forestry projects with Gifford Pinchot, America's first professional forester. The art collection expanded, the library evolved. Every detail was improved. George had built exactly the life he desired: quiet, cultured, distant from the brutal corporate world his brothers occupied. By March 1914, they had been married 16 years. Cornelia, now 13, studied with private tutors. The family split their time between their mountain estate and their Washington, D.C. townhouse. George was 51, seemingly healthy, with every expectation of decades more in the refined world he had created. Then his appendix began to ache. It was common and usually minor if treated early. Doctors recommended surgery. Appendectomies were standard by then, thousands performed every year. The risks were low. He checked into the hospital for what should have been a minor operation. The procedure was done in early March. At first, everything appeared normal. Recovery continued in his hospital room, and he expected to return to Asheville within a week or two. But complications set in. The exact problems were never fully revealed, possibly infection, internal bleeding, or surgical error. In that era, even basic procedures carried dangers modern medicine has since eliminated. His condition collapsed rapidly. His fever rose. The pain spread. Doctors tried everything they had, but the medical tools of the time were limited. Antibiotics wouldn't exist for another 15 years. Surgery was improving, but still primitive. Whatever went wrong, they couldn't reverse it. On March 6, 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt died in his Washington hospital room. He was 51. The official cause: complications following appendectomy surgery. His body was transported back to Asheville and buried in the family plot. Hundreds attended. Newspapers nationwide reported the death. The man who built America's largest private home was gone, leaving behind a widow, a teenage daughter, and assets whose true value had never been fully calculated. Edith learned the news by telegram. She was 42, abruptly alone with responsibilities she had never been trained for. George had handled everything: finances, legal matters, business decisions. She focused on Cornelia's education and the social life of the estate. She knew the property was valuable. She knew it was expensive to maintain, but she had no idea what awaited her. George's will was simple. Everything went to Edith. The chateau, the land, the art, the furniture, the library, 125,000 acres of North Carolina mountains, the 250-room mansion, every painting, book, tapestry, and chandelier. She inherited it all. And with it, a disaster. Because 5 months before George's death, the federal government enacted a completely new law, the federal estate tax. And the Vanderbilts were about to become its earliest and most visible casualties. In the immediate aftermath, she focused on grief, on Cornelia, on the funeral. But the lawyers would explain soon enough. The IRS assessors would arrive within months, and she would learn that owning America's largest private home meant facing America's newest and most relentless tax collectors. The fight for Biltmore was about to begin.